Hello, Patrick. Great to see you again. It's
Oh,
been
it's a pleasure to see you.
okay. I think it's been since I interviewed you for the book, right? Break the Wall: How and Why to Democratize Digital in Your Business.
Yes.
And yeah, and so yeah, with the book out and everything, I remember in that interview we really found it focused also on the company you're working with and so forth. In this interview, I really just kind of want to have a more general kind of feeling about, the role you play, and also how, how maybe past experience or training has helped you for that. So I noticed in that previous interview, right, that you studied communication before, and so in your current role, how does that help you, and how is it different from maybe what you studied back in college?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, I'm looking back on my career. There's definitely been a very dynamic intake of a lot of different areas of expertise that I think have informed my current function and the work that I've been doing for the past few years and plan to do in the future. And to summarize that work, basically what I do is I manage the end-to-end performance conversations that are happening within a given organization. And so, what does that mean, right? Usually, that's a combination of three things. It's the technical side. I come from a data engineering background, and so a lot of data engineering consulting work. I was a professional economist for a period of time, so a lot of heavy stats work and programming. And using that background, the first component is sourcing a very strong data infrastructure to pull insights from, right? And so that means creating a good architecture on the cloud. It means pulling data from many disparate sources and making sure that you can pull them all into one or two or three common sources that are clean and easily queryable, and just making sure that those are high quality, they aren't having breakages, and making sure that we can scale it up. If we get new information, launch a new product, open a new office, that as we pull more data, we can own that architecture and build it up. So that's the first part. The second part, it becomes a little easier, right? So once we have that clean data, easier in one way and more difficult in another, is we now we have to actually load that data into something to share with non-technical folks. And so, as I said, I was a data engineering background, but it was always in the context of business. And especially over the past 4 or 5 years, my work has moved away from the strict coding environment and more into that translator role of actually working with those teams, managing those teams, yeah, still doing some modeling, but also pushing that data into visualizations, into real-time dashboards, into reports. These can be, whether they can be a spreadsheet that is automatically loaded up and has some visuals tied to it, to something as complex as Tableau Einstein and working in a machine learning model and trying to show what's happening in a forecast to folks who might not be technicians, folks like strategy or the talent team or our workforce management teams or investors. And finally, once we have those insights in a clean place and they've been curated and selected, and we have those KPIs to work with, the last part is actually owning those conversations, sharing them with people, making sure that those visuals don't live by themselves. They should be able to, but every first time someone sets their eyes on it, there should be someone to give context, right? Because an insight isn't just a KPI. It's also, why is this happening? What has been happening leading up to this? What can we do about it? It's never as simple as just flip the switch and it's fixed. We have to take people off of projects. We have to talk to the team in Ireland about doing this so the team in Germany understands and the team in the US understands. And there's a lot of contextuality that cannot get lost. And so it's really kind of owning that end to end discussion from the sourcing, the visualization, and then through to the resolution based on what we're seeing.
Okay, well, excellent. So, and you put it nicely in perspective, kind of how important communication and context are in marketing analytics, right? Building on the foundations of good architecture and data. So, you mentioned KPIs or key performance indicators. How do you define, what is a KPI? How do do you know it when you see one, right?
Yeah.
And how do you decide which KPIs, should be kind of maybe on the first page of a dashboard, or should you focus the decision maker on?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And it's something that a lot of businesses, I think, are starting to take more of a standard approach to, but not quite yet, right? We're still not there. So the philosophy that I bring to wherever I work, and it's worked so far for wherever I've been, is a very simple one. Before we even start talking about how to measure things, i.e., create a KPI and turn it into a metric, we try to talk with the people who will be responsible for managing that data.
Okay.
So yeah, so maybe we're trying to look at supply chain optimization and we're trying to see how many orders go out. I don't work on the supply chain team. So I'm going to reach out to the supply chain team and say, what are the outcomes you guys want? Before we even start measuring the KPI, we got to know what they want. And let's say, for example, they want to optimize, outflow of product and minimize the cost in doing so, right? So that could be a ratio. We're looking at, the ratio of products to, the cost of it. And maybe it's, trying to optimize that, right? So we would propose to them this ratio or see if they have any old ideas or old KPIs floating around that we want to reconcile into one or two simple, understandable ones based on that outcome. And then once we have that in place, it's a matter of sourcing the data. We have to make sure, to your point of what makes a good KPI, we have to make sure that there's clear alignment from everyone who will be speaking to it on what it's supposed to represent and what it's supposed to be tracking toward. Secondly, it has to be accessible data. So the data actually has to be real and fluid. If it's based on a survey that's run once every 4 months and we only get 50 data points, it might not be that reliable versus something that we might get every day or every few hours or every couple of weeks. It's a little easier with more data points. We got to make sure we have a good flow of data. And lastly, we need to make sure that there's proper management and ownership of that data, which in data governance, as you know, is called data lineage. It means who changed this? Hey, we changed the definition a year ago. What did it change to? What was it? And who did that? And that way we have accountability. We have a good volume of data to work with. And we're always tracking toward the same outcomes. And even the non-technical folks know what it means.
Oh, excellent. So it seems to me that, because you're working backwards from what the business wants, that ultimately the KPI will matter to their decisions. And then, of course, you have to do all the homework to make sure it's high quality and so forth. So kind of, at the end of that process, like you talked about visualization, right? So how do you decide to best visualize for a decision maker? And it may differ kind of, who you're talking to, probably.
Yeah, I think typically, I think that simplicity is best, right? So what we want to do is there's always the temptation, right? Especially from the analyst side of the table to maybe oversupply information.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it becomes definitely more of an art than a science in that way, is making sure that we can have, usually when I try to present a point, I will try to keep it to just one or two charts at best. And if I really need to, push a third. And then maybe we can have, so we have 3 points to make one. Let's say we have a presentation, we're trying to make 3 points. Each point should have 1 to 2 charts. And so it gets the story across in a total of maybe 3 bullet points proven out by 6 to maybe 8 charts. And I think that can tell a whole story. That's 10 pages to read through with an introduction and a conclusion. We have notes in each slide. And I think that's enough for folks because we don't lose their attention span. But also, to your point, if we're trying to do something, I think exploring the charts a little bit more actively is helpful. And by that, I mean, let's say we have a chart about, let's say revenue, a very simple revenue chart. And we have the historical, and maybe it stops after 3 quarters, and then we have a projection, right? We don't just want to have a line. We might want to have a dovetail so that we can see the range and folks can understand that this is not a hard answer. We know that it's going to fall within this range most likely. And then maybe to also include a dotted line that can indicate maybe the average over the past 3 quarters.
Okay, so nice comparison base, yeah.
Yes, and the last thing, if you really want to keep it busy, but it's always helpful, I think, in a business context, is if there are key historical events, to maybe cut a couple of vertical lines and just indicate this is what caused this. There can be a dip or an outlier. This is what caused this, and that way it tells a whole story, and it can live on its own beyond just a chart that moves up and down, has a forecast, and you expect people to understand it. It gives a bit more insight, and it takes 15 extra minutes to add those extra components.
Yeah. It is an advice I always heard. Make sure the graph stands on its own. That even if it's taken maybe out of context of the dashboard, it's kind of clear what's there. And this is also really helping people who are not very kind of analytics savvy to truly understand what's going on.
Yeah, and I think that's the best point, right? Is they're key performance indicators. And I think a lot of people forget that they're indicators. If we see, the interest rate go up from the Fed, that is an indicator that some things will happen.
Completely hypothetical scenario.
Hypothetical situation, of course.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean everything's going to happen. It indicates, and it makes us dig deeper to kind of see if some of those things are happening. Same with the KPI. We want to make sure that whatever we're forecasting, it's an indicator, but that means that there's a context, there's a conversation to happen around it. And it's not tried and true, the immutable truth. It's an approximation, the best that we can get. And there's a story behind it and what we need to consider when we move forward.
Yeah, excellent. And this is also kind of what, from my experience, kind of, even the best dashboard or KPIs, it's the beginning of a conversation, right? You're really informing a conversation, which is still typically, among humans to kind of come up with an ultimate decision there. So you're really kind of aiming to be helpful in that conversation.
Exactly. I think the duty of any analyst, I think whether it be in a business context or data science context or any, is to remember that analytics is, at the end of the day, it's intelligence, it's the neurology of the business, and everyone has a shared responsibility, not just the engineers, the technicians, every strategist, every member of HR personnel, every technical engineer who's working maybe in manufacturing side of things or just data, marketing, everyone has reliance on that intelligence. And so it needs to be owned by everybody, right? That's the only way business can move forward.
Exactly. And so this is a great, plug-in for my last question, right? So in our previous interview, right, for the Break the Wall book, you shared that coordination, organization, and alignment are key factors for a data-driven organization. Can you please elaborate on that coordination, organization, and alignment?
Absolutely. I can give you a brief example, in fact. In my current role when I first joined, right now I serve a very strong data governance function. Because there had not really been one before I had joined. And so when I came, this is a large company, so there was very strong need to organize their data. What we saw was that there was a series of KPIs. We had about 1,300 we were tracking, and there were about 20 that were considered the core, the main needles for the business. And I'd say about 18 of those were being managed globally. And we would go to talk to folks in the Utah office,
Yeah.
folks in London, folks in Italy. And what we would see is they would call a KPI the same thing, but they would actually use a different calculation to pull it. And
Very typical.
yes, and however slight it may be, it could be a 5% difference, but if the KPI only wavers 3%, then it's always off target, it's always off bounds. And we also realized that a level deeper, there was no person responsible for owning that update. And it was just a team and people could point fingers. And so our goal, one of our things we did, was we actually created a data dictionary. We said, here's every KPI. Here's the layman's definition. Here's the technical definition. Here's the calculation. Here's the actual code to calculate it. And here's the owner in North America. Here's the owner in EU. So it's just two people. They can all speak to it. And if anything changes, let us know and we'll update it. But this one row is your truth. That is the single source of truth, and everyone needs to know. Because otherwise, a business, the only thing worse than not having intelligence is having the wrong intelligence with the confidence that it's right. And
Yes.
so that's a very core component to keeping the gears moving.
We see lots of examples of bad intelligence being worse than no intelligence. And so kind of based on that data quality and so forth, do you feel that decision makers really kind of take your insights into account? Do you get some feedback on, yes, this was useful and this is how it changed our decision for the better?
Absolutely. We have a lot of recurring work with the COO, with all of our different national leads.
Okay.
And there's a great deal of trust. And I think the trust, to your point, isn't only to provide strong insights, but to also provide an environment of transparency and shared accountability. Because at the end of the day, it creates a culture of partnership. And it lets one team work with another team that maybe wouldn't normally see what each other was doing, because it's common performance. Having these dialogues as a group, having a shared level of responsibility in the same process pushes those things forward. So it is that point of getting really good rigid insights forward that might not have been there before, but it's also about establishing trust between different teams that are all under the same umbrella that might normally not talk to each other, so they can all think about the bigger picture.
Okay. Well, fantastic. Well, thanks so much for your time and your enthusiasm in speaking with us, Patrick. I really enjoyed it, just like before. And yeah, all the best in your day and your week. And yeah, looking forward to seeing you again in the future. Thank you very much.
Likewise, thank you, Colin.